Something happened this week that sounded like fiction. Not the kind of fiction that stretches the truth a little. The kind where, if you tried to pitch it as a movie, a studio executive would stop you mid-sentence and say, "That's too much." No one would believe that. But here's the thing. All of it happened, every single piece of it. And once you understand how these stories connect, what they reveal together is far more alarming than any one of them alone. Let's start with Denmark, not because it seems the most urgent, but because it tells you something important about where the United States now stands in the world. Denmark is a NATO ally. It has been for decades. It is, by every legal and diplomatic definition, a friend of the United States. And yet, just a few weeks ago, Denmark reportedly sent soldiers to Greenland.
Denmark and NATO are really ramping up their presence here in Greenland. Overnight, the Danish military flew in a C-130 Hercules transport aircraft here into Nuuk. They're increasing their military presence, they say, because of rising security tensions.
Armed soldiers with live explosives and emergency blood supplies. Not for a training exercise, not for a military drill, for a real deployment. The explosives were to blow up airport runways. The blood supplies were prepared in anticipation of casualties, in a potential conflict with the United States. Think about that for a moment. A NATO ally, a country that shares our values, our alliances, our defense agreements, had to prepare for the possibility of armed confrontation with us. Because the President of the United States has publicly and repeatedly declared his intention to take Greenland by force if necessary. That is not a fictional threat. That is official stated policy. And Denmark took it seriously enough to send soldiers with live ammunition. Here is the question at the heart of this story. How did we get here? How did a country that has led the democratic world for nearly a century arrive at a moment where its closest allies are arming themselves against it? Where its own citizens are losing their health insurance by the millions? Where the president is threatening to commit what legal experts are calling war crimes on live television? And where democracy itself, the actual mechanics of voting, is being dismantled in real time. This is not a story about one bad week. This is a story about a pattern, a serious one. Let's walk through what actually happened. Start with Hungary. Viktor Orban, the authoritarian Prime Minister of Hungary, has been receiving an unusual amount of attention from American officials lately. Secretary of State Marco Rubio visited him. Vice President J.D. Vance was scheduled to follow. And President Trump himself recorded what was described as a, quote, creepy video endorsement for Orban. Not as a diplomatic courtesy, but as a campaign boost. Because Hungary has elections coming up. And by every available measure, Viktor Orban is losing. So the Trump administration began publicly propping him up. But that's where the story gets darker. Russia was also trying to help Orban. The Washington Post reported that Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, began sounding the alarm about Orban's plummeting poll numbers. And what did they propose to do about it? They called it the game changer. The game changer was staging a fake assassination attempt against Viktor Orban, not a real one, a staged one. The goal was to manufacture a moment of national crisis that would rally voters to his side. Russian operatives had already been running social media campaigns to boost Orban. They had used fake AI-generated videos to smear opposition candidates. They had spread manufactured allegations against Orban's political rivals. But apparently, none of that was enough. So they were allegedly plotting a fake attack on the man they were trying to save. And here is why that matters beyond Hungary. These are the same tactics, the same playbook, the same information warfare that Russia deployed during the 2016 and 2020 United States elections. Only now it's happening inside NATO, with American officials simultaneously visiting and endorsing the same man Russia is trying to protect. And this is where things become complicated, because this isn't just an alliance story. This isn't just geopolitics. This is a direct overlap between the foreign policy of the United States government and the strategic interests of the Russian state. Both of them at this exact moment are working toward the same outcome in Hungary. Now let's talk about the war, the one most Americans still can't fully explain. President Trump launched military action against Iran. Why exactly? He has not said. what the endgame looks like? He has not credibly explained. What we do know is this. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical shipping lanes on the planet, has been choked off as a result. Roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through that strait. When it closes, energy prices spike, supply chains fracture, and economies, not just America's, but the global economy, begin to buckle. On Saturday, Trump issued an ultimatum. If Iran did not open the shipping lanes by Monday, he said he would bomb Iran's civilian power plants, starting, he specified, with the biggest one first. Bombing civilian power infrastructure is not a gray area in international law. It is a war crime. He said this out loud. On the record, to the public, Monday arrived and Trump backed down. He announced that there were now new talks happening. Talks, he said, that were going great. Iran said there were no talks. The Iranians flatly denied that any new negotiations were underway. But here is the detail you cannot ignore. Even as Trump declared these phantom talks were going great, he was simultaneously deploying an additional 4,500 sailors and Marines to the region. And the New York Times was reporting that he was considering activating the 82nd Airborne Division as well. Watch what he does, not what he says, because what he is doing looks less like diplomacy and more like a president who started something he has absolutely no idea how to finish. And the economic consequences of this are not theoretical. 2 million Americans have lost their health insurance since January, not because of a natural disaster, not because of a recession that nobody saw coming, but because of specific policy choices made by this administration and its Republican allies in Congress. 0 net private sector jobs were created in the last 6 months. 0. The Federal Reserve confirmed it. The Strait of Hormuz conflict is pouring gasoline onto an economy that was already beginning to smoke, and the president has no plan. Let's step back and talk about what is actually happening to democratic institutions. In Riverside County, California, a Trump-supporting Republican sheriff walked into an election facility and seized ballots. Not because his office has any legal jurisdiction over election administration. It doesn't. Not because a court ordered him to. No court did. But because he and his deputies have guns and badges and they said they had heard something was wrong. That is how it works. He seized over 1,000 boxes of election material.
More than 650,000 ballots. No warrant established in advance. No legal authority, just power.
And the response from the federal government? Silence. Now look at the airports. American air travel is in collapse. Jet fuel prices are surging because of the Iran conflict. TSA agents are not being paid because of a funding standoff in Washington. At Houston's airport, security lines were exceeding 4 hours. Atlanta was advising travelers on domestic flights to arrive 4 hours early. And then at LaGuardia in New York, a runway collision killed 2 pilots and sent 41 people to the hospital. This is not a metaphor. This is a functioning system coming apart. But here is what the president said about it. At a campaign rally in Tennessee, Trump told Republicans he did not want the SA crisis to be solved. He said he did not want any resolution to the funding standoff, the one that is keeping SA agents unpaid and airports in chaos, until Democrats agreed to new restrictions on voting rights. He said Republicans had to get this done, for Jesus. That was the phrase he used. And this is the moment many people overlooked, because buried in that bizarre statement is something important. The president is explicitly using a national safety crisis, one that has already produced a fatal accident, as a bargaining chip for voter suppression legislation. He is not trying to fix the problem. He is trying to use the problem. To be fair, there is a defense of this administration's approach. The argument goes something like this. The world was already unstable. Iran was already a regional threat. The NATO alliance was already fraying. Elections were already being influenced by foreign actors. Trump's supporters would say that his confrontational style is forcing conversations that previous administrations avoided, that the firmness on Greenland is about strategic national security interests in the Arctic, that the pressure on Iran was always necessary, that supporting leaders like Orban is simply pragmatic alliance management. And on the domestic front, the argument is that restructuring government programs, including health coverage, is a painful but necessary correction of bloated systems. These are the arguments. They deserve to be heard. But here is where the argument runs into serious problems. A serious problem. The Greenland situation isn't about strategic Arctic positioning if it's pushing a NATO ally to prepare for armed conflict with the United States. You cannot simultaneously claim to strengthen alliances while causing those allies to deploy live explosives against you. The Iran conflict isn't pressure diplomacy if there are no credible goals, no defined victory conditions, and the president is threatening civilian infrastructure in the same breath that he claims talks are going well. And the domestic argument collapses entirely when you look at the numbers. 2 million people losing health insurance is not a correction. 0 private sector jobs in 6 months is not economic restructuring. A sheriff seizing 650,000 ballots without legal authority is not election integrity. These are not reforms. They are the symptoms of a system under sustained stress. And the TSA moment is the clearest example of all. You cannot defend a policy of deliberately prolonging a national safety crisis to extract political concessions on voting rights. That is not governance, that is leverage. So where does all of this go? The Hungary election is weeks away. If Orban loses despite Russian interference and American endorsements, it would be a significant blow to the authoritarian international movement that has found quiet support in Washington. If he wins, it signals that these tactics work, and they will be used again. The Iran situation has no clear endpoint. There is no exit strategy on the table, no peace framework being discussed publicly, and more American military assets are moving into the region every day. The economic pressure from the Strait of Hormuz will continue to compound. The Riverside County ballot seizure will almost certainly face legal challenge. But the damage to public trust in elections is not something a court ruling can fully repair. And if the sheriff faces no serious consequences, other sheriffs in other counties will be watching. The ESA crisis will eventually be resolved one way or another. But the precedent, a president openly admitting he is using a safety emergency as political leverage, that precedent does not go away. And on the international stage, every one of America's allies is watching. They are watching what happened in Greenland. They are watching what is happening in Hungary. They are watching a country that once defined the rules of the international order begin to operate outside of them. History has a way of making moments look inevitable in hindsight. The weeks and months that changed everything rarely announce themselves. They usually look at first like a collection of separate stories. A diplomatic dispute here, an economic report there, a crisis at an airport, a sheriff making a questionable call, a president making an outrageous statement that gets covered for a day and then disappears. But step back far enough and the pattern becomes visible. What happened this week was not random. It was not a series of unrelated events. It was a stress test. And the question this moment is asking, not of politicians, not of pundits, but of citizens, is a simple one. What kind of country do you want to live in? Not someday, now. Because the decisions being made right now in Washington and NATO capitals, in county sheriff's offices in California, are not abstract. They are already changing lives. 2 million people already know that. And if history is any guide, this is not the end of something. It is the beginning.